Well, hello everybody. This is Joel Harden. Ici Joel Harden. I am coming to you from a basement in the great riding of Ottawa Centre, which is located, want to start in a good way, on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin peoples. So we're trying out something different. My colleague Samia Raida and I are working on this Java with Joel. So here I have my NDP mug here. I'm working on coffee here. How are you? How are you, folks? Look, this is just an opportunity for me to be available in a digital space to take any questions you may have, hear any concerns you may have, rather like we would do in normal times pre-pandemic when folks would drop into our constituency office, which unfortunately has been closed for months. It's been closed for months. And that's just because we are trying to listen to what science experts are telling us we need to do to keep each other safe. I don't know about you, but I'm getting glimmerings of the possibility that we may be seeing some light at the end of the tunnel, and that light is not a train. That all of the work that people have done to keep themselves and their neighbors safe is coming to something. I see a lot of people getting vaccinated. Hi, Lillian. Nice to see you. Thank you for joining us. I'm seeing the possibility of something coming at us this summer. I'm noticing a lot more people hopeful. Trying as the last number of weeks have been, and I actually want to begin on that note, if that's okay, before we get into any questions and concerns people may have for us. This has been a challenging month for our country, hasn't it? From events around the world that we have seen, one of the flashpoints for human rights, of course, in the world concerns the Palestinian people, the Israeli people, as they try to figure out a way to peace. And it's been disappointing, to say the least, to see hostilities resume, to see airstrikes in Gaza resume. Not long after that, we saw the discovery of the remains of children at the former site of the residential school in Kamloops, British Columbia. And I'm not sure if you have seen Justice Murray Sinclair's reflection on that, 10-minute reflection on that. If you haven't, jump on the Google, jump on your search engine of choice, and please type in Murray Sinclair reaction Kamloops. It is 10 minutes that you need to watch. Another 10 minutes I would encourage you to watch is a speech my friend, the member of Provincial Parliament for Kiiwetinoong, Saul Mamakwa. Saul's community is a community of 28 fly-in communities of Indigenous folks. Saul gave a passionate 10-minute speech to the floor of the Ontario legislature, going right after the crux of the issue, which is colonialism and our country's violent history that we need to reckon with. So I encourage you to watch Justice Sinclair's address. I encourage you to watch Saul's address. And beyond that, we have more recently seen the tragic events in London, Ontario, of a Muslim family walking, as so many of our families do after dinner, struck down by someone whose heart was consumed with hate. And our country was shocked by that. But it's interesting to use that verb shocked, because it isn't the first time. It isn't the first time we've seen an act of hatred result in a tragedy. It wasn't that long ago that a mosque in Etobicoke had a volunteer attacked and killed outside that particular mosque in Etobicoke. In the Premier's own riding, it wasn't that long ago that we saw the horrific events in January at the Mosque of Quebec City, where a gentleman, Alexandre Bissonnette, consumed with hate, carry out an unthinkable and awful, tragic massacre of worshippers. So we have been thinking actively here, and this is maybe where I will bring some of my open commentary to a close, of how we can actually figure out a way to humanize those who have been dehumanized, our Muslim neighbors whose faith has been a target of folks online, and in these awful instances, a physical target of people whose hearts have been consumed by hate. So I'm not going to let the cat fully out of the bag, but I'm very happy to be working with our friends in the Muslim community here locally. I'm very thankful for the work that's been done in London, Ontario, and around the country to figure a way beyond Islamophobia, systemic Islamophobia, systemic anti-Muslim hatred, and to figure out a way towards peace, towards mutual respect and tolerance and understanding. So I'm excited, I think, to be in a position later today to be talking about a community initiative here in Ottawa that I hope will grow. So I'll leave you in some suspense there, but let it be known that folks of conscience here in our city, in Ottawa and Algonquin territory and around the country are working, having been led and inspired by our Muslim neighbors to figure out a way beyond thoughts and prayers, because that's certainly what I have heard loud and clear from the Muslim communities and from people who have been just seized by this moment. We have to get beyond denunciations and thoughts and prayers. It's a time for action. It's a time for community action. I know the National Council of Canadian Muslims have called for an urgent federal summit on Islamophobia. They've appealed to the Prime Minister to make that happen. I take this opportunity now. If anybody working for the Prime Minister is watching this, please take up that call from our friends at the National Council of Canadian Muslims to convene that meeting. That's what we can do, frankly, in political offices. We can convene spaces to take action, as Lillian's just saying. Thank you for saying that, Lillian. I'm reading what Matthew's writing here. I still remember back in 2019, some of the voting booths for the Ottawa South Nepean were in a mosque, and there were far-right types saying that this was proof there was going to be voter fraud. My goodness, Matthew. Yeah, there's another example. There's another example of how Islamophobia has poisoned people's hearts. I'm not sure if people remember the words of Imam Gouillet, who's one of the leading imams in Quebec, and as I understand in Quebec City, what he said. Look it up. Look it up. Because I remember people retweeting what Imam Gouillet said in the wake of the January 2017 massacre in Quebec City at the mosque there. His comments, if I remember correctly, I'm going to paraphrase, was before Alexandre Bissonnette decided to put bullets into our Muslim neighbors in that mosque, there was something more poisonous put into his brain, that Alexandre was a victim as well, that he was a victim of people promulgating hate. And I am actively, and I'll take this opportunity again, if anybody watching this has expertise in how we work on projects of restorative justice, I'll mention one right now before going to some more comments. Look, and Matthew's pointing out quite right that after Quebec City, we had the massacre in Christchurch, New Zealand. Very true. And they convened a special committee to look after that. Very true. I agree. Let's hope that we have in Canada a process that does the exact same thing, because I'm with those who have said it's time to move beyond thoughts and prayers. But I want to mention something. I mentioned it on the floor of the legislature over the weekend when we were recalled for a special meeting, special sitting of the legislature. I want to shout out Reverend Dr. Anthony Bailey at the Parkdale United Church, one of Ottawa's leading Black pastors, who said to me, remarked to me, that when that church was defaced by racist graffiti, and that same individual had defaced a rabbi's front door, had defaced our downtown Scott Street Mosque, Reverend Bailey worked with that individual through a process of restorative justice to access his heart, to try to figure out what it was that led him to believe these hateful things, and to have a conversation about it, guided by experts. We have experts in our city here who specialize in restorative justice. And I'm proud to tell you that 3 years later, that this took an investment, this took time, but 3 years later, this individual who was involved in those acts, who committed those acts, now denounces hatred, now denounces Nazism, now wants to work with advocates for restorative justice with any person, young or old, that is consumed by a hatred, a fear of others. I agree, Lillian, that church does so much for the community. Parkdale United Church is a special place. Shout out to you. Shout out to all of you folks who have taken on hate on a one-to-one basis. So what I did in that speech I gave it over the weekend was, in an earnest way, because Premier Ford was there, he was there to hear those words, I implored upon him to put resources into an important institution in Ontario. It's the Anti-Racism Secretariat. And right now that organization has pitifully little money, and it's taken no major initiatives that I've seen. I would like to see the Anti-Racism Secretariat in Ontario fund community efforts like what Reverend Dr. Anthony Bailey did, restorative justice efforts, so we can reach people. Because what I'm being told is, before someone commits a lethal act of hatred, there are many, many, many more acts of hatred. It could be yelling, it could be assault, it could be property damage, it could be any number of things. And that always triggers a police response, because these are acts that are obviously not in keeping with a democratic society. But what Reverend Bailey did was try to reach that person in that moment and say, okay, you can go the incarceration route, you can go the criminal justice route, or you can go our route. You can go the restorative justice route, and it entails an obligation on you. And this can't be done poorly. This has to be done well. This is a professional process that I know people in our community are well versed in. But when that individual committed to that process, what we have now is an ambassador for someone who can reach people who've been consumed by hate. So let's think about that. Let's think about how we can de-escalate people, how we can reach people, how, in as much as people will dehumanize our Muslim neighbors or our Jewish neighbors or our Black neighbors or our newcomer neighbors, let's not return the dehumanization on them and think that just by calling someone a terrorist or calling someone a threat to society that we've solved the problem of hate. We haven't. We have to figure out a way to conquer hate with policy that fronts humanization and fronts compassion. That's what experts are telling me, and I think this is welcome advice. I want to read out a comment from Jay here. Jay Woodruff, thank you so much, my friend, for joining us. How do the people who've been fighting for change during the pandemic keep the momentum and attention as people try desperately to move on from the pandemic and risking moving beyond all of the hate that some people will blame the pandemic on? Jay, that is an excellent question. Samia, I wouldn't mind if you wouldn't mind sending Jay a link. We can maybe talk about this live, Jay, if you're okay with that. If you're near a camera, I would love to hear your thoughts on this more. So stay tuned. Watch your emails, Jay, because Samia will send you a note to see if we can make that happen, so we can actually have a conversation about it. My gut, Jay, is telling me we just have to be real. We have to be real. We have to figure out a way to not fake our way out of this pandemic. You know, I don't know about you guys, everybody watching this, but I remember hearing so many times, we can't go back to normal. We're all in this together. We have to embrace change. There are moments, and I'm an optimistic person, but there are moments when I feel like those were nice, warm words in that moment, but we haven't really met the test of that. We haven't met the test of that. Because of understandable fatigue that many of us are feeling in this pandemic, many of us maybe just want to head straight back to the pre-pandemic age and not face some of those structural problems that were exposed in this pandemic. Let me talk about a few of those. So let's talk about the discrimination, open discrimination against people with disabilities. Jay and I have worked on this together through our party, through the NDP. You know, we know that the country came to an epiphany in this pandemic, that there needed to be a basic income of $2,000 for folks displaced by this pandemic. Folks who had their workplaces shut, folks who had their livelihoods thrown into chaos, folks who were doing what we were asking them to do, stay home and stay safe. Well, that meant foregoing work, foregoing an opportunity to have their businesses work. So we said to 9 million Canadians, we've got your back, and we can actually fund you to be safe at a cost of $2,000 a month. But meanwhile, in the same period, as Jay knows very well, we asked people with disabilities in the province of Ontario, who are drawing upon the income of the Ontario Disability Support Program, to live in poverty. The maximum income one can have as an individual through the ODSP is $1,169 a month. $1,169 a month. And to qualify for that program, you need to demonstrate that it's pretty difficult for you to maintain any kind of significant relationship with paid employment. That what we do through solidarity, through our income security programs, is make sure that people can live. And that's actually not charity. That's called solidarity. That's called income security. That's called making sure that we have robust public policy that keeps people safe. But I heard from so many people with disabilities who told me that they were gutted by the recognition that there is something called a basic income for many people through the CERB, and not for people with disabilities. Now, Samia is telling me that, Jay, you're on here. Now, how do I... There you are. Hey! How are you, Jay?
Hello. Can you hear me?
I sure can.
This is an awesome program. I like this better than Zoom. Thank you
Can you
very
hear me?
much. Mm-hmm.
Okay, Jay, well, why don't you... I was just rambling on there while I was trying to respond to your question. What are your thoughts when you think about this question that you posed?
I've learned a lot about compassion fatigue over the last little bit, and people stop caring about caring, and that's such a hard thing to do because you have all the things you've talked about so far and so many things you haven't talked about, and people are trying really hard to fight for these things, and they all get their moments where community, or not the community, but the narrative is focused on their specific issue, but then it moves. Unfortunately, something else happens, and it moves on, and something else happens, and I'm terrified that all the amazing work a lot of people have been doing and a lot of progress on awareness is just going to vanish because compassion fatigue and people just want to, that's it, I'm done, the pandemic's over, and move on, because they're going to, a lot of people and a lot of politicians on other sides, I'll say, are going to really try and bundle everything in as, oh, the pandemic's over, all that stuff, all that crap we've been talking about in the news and seeing, that's all part of that we can move on. And
Right.
we're defenseless against like a powerhouse of media and political parties trying to bundle it all in and go, that's all now behind us.
Right. So how, I guess my question for you, Jay, when I think about ODSP recipients, it's 500,000 people in the province of Ontario, 2.4 million people with disabilities of 14 million Ontarians. Like, this is a significant community in our province, but as you say, we fear the fact that people will want to move on, we'll want to go back to normal, and we won't remember how people suffered and that people are still suffering. So what are your I mean, I have some thoughts, but what are your thoughts on how we continue to reach people? I know you and others have been very active to great effect with social media. I remember very well the hashtag ODS Poverty showing up and giving people a platform and giving people a space to connect and to speak their truth and to talk about what's happening to them. But there's a dialogue we can have with politicians, but there also is a dialogue we need to have with the average person out there too, to reach them. So what are your thoughts on that?
I've also learned a lot about advocating over the last bit. A lot of people have, where I haven't met anyone over the since the start of 2020, who doesn't fight, not just disability related things, but anything. They don't advocate on spare time or in spare time. It's their life. And on top of that, you're dealing with the things you're dealing with that make you advocate. So you know most of the things I've been trying to deal with. And that's just me. And there's also the mental health impact of advocating, which I have not dealt with very well. I overwhelm myself constantly and don't really have limits in place. But I don't have an answer. I was kind of asking almost in a way of wanting that magic answer, because so many people that I know that have been fighting, like, we've gone through a pandemic, a time that should have been like the absolute time for change.
Right.
It was the easiest excuse to change.
Right.
And things have gotten a lot worse, like a lot worse.
Yeah.
And as John is saying, it's not compassion fatigue, but like mental and physical exhaustion. So I don't know how we go forward, because for me, it's going to be terrifying when the pandemic is marketed as over and beyond, because a lot of the space that a lot of people have had is going to disappear and it's going to go back. So I really don't know how. If it's scary to think we could go through, as long as we have the global health crisis, the housing crisis, food crisis, all these things, all the hate that you covered, the things we're talking about right now with residential schools, all of this stuff cannot be hidden by just, let's go on with our daily autopilot type life. But what I'm guessing, what the question I guess I'm trying to ask is, we have a spotlight on so many things. It's really hard to keep it there, but it's easier right now. And what can we do as a community to keep it all focused? I'm sorry for the long-winded
No, I think you're posing that's the right question, man. And so let me offer you something, everybody watching this. Um, Maybe we're trying to talk to the wrong people. What do I mean by that? Maybe we spend a lot of time trying to talk to the Ford government about the need for them to increase benefits for income security programs for people who are living in legislated poverty, when the people we should be really talking to, let me take a Bernie Sanders leap, Jay, if you'll permit me, are the people we fund who are already well off and already affluent. Let me talk about that. Not many people know that the second most significant part of Ontario's budget as a province, it's not education. It's not income security programs for people with disabilities. It's tax expenditures. So the number one thing we spend money on, about $69 billion, and I'm thankful for every single cent, is healthcare. But the next biggest thing we spend money on, $44.5 billion, is tax expenditures. What are tax expenditures? Tax expenditures are things you write off at tax time, right? So a lot of people will be familiar with money they try to save for their kids through RESPs, Registered Education Savings Programs, or RRSPs. That's kind of commonly known, although a lot of people don't have very much wealth tied up in that because people are making the kind of money that they can't simply put money aside. It's something that is a tax write-off for, frankly, folks like me who are making decent salaries to kind of sock money away to look after themselves or their families, right? So we spend billions in subsidies for the RESP and RRSP industries. That's one piece. But the other one that drives me nuts, Jay, is that we spend billions in stock option tax write-offs. Now, the people who have wealth in stock, and I'm not saying, in my RRSP, I have a tiny bit of oil investments because in that portfolio I bought at my credit union or bank, like there's a tiny bit of, X and Y company in it. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about direct ownership of a company through stock. There's a very small minority of people, very, very affluent people in our province who have stock options to deduct at tax time. But throughout this whole pandemic, we maintained those write-offs, which cost Ontario hundreds of millions of dollars. And I said, when I had the opportunity with my friend Lisa Gretzky to scrutinize the province's budget at committee on ODSP and Ontario Works, I said to them, why didn't you in the pandemic tell affluent people, frankly like me and much more affluent than me, you're not going to get your write-offs for stock options this year. You're not going to get your write-offs even for RESPs or RRSPs this year because people are living in poverty. Their food costs have gone up. Everything about life has become more expensive in this pandemic, particularly for people with disabilities and folks living in poverty. So you're not getting your write-offs this year. And the funny thing was, so the minister responsible was Todd Smith. He smiled and he said, I think, Chair, we're getting a glimpse at the NDP platform. Let me tell you, Jay, I hope so. I hope so. We need to ask our friends in this province who make a lot of money, who have a lot of affluence, that it's time the people of Ontario didn't fund hundreds of millions of dollars for them. They don't need the money. They don't need the help. And what I was trying to tell Minister Smith in that conversation was maybe the conversation I need to have is not with you. It's with Bay Street. It's with billionaires. It's with multimillionaires who may perhaps be funding Mr. Smith's party, other parties, certainly not ours, I can tell you that. Our conversations with them, where's your humanity? Where's your humanity that, it's okay to have a province that in the middle of a pandemic is funding hundreds of millions of dollars in tax write-offs. We went through tax season not long ago in April for people to have stock option deductions or capital gains deductions or any of these tools, these lawyer and accountant tools that very wealthy people use to reduce or eliminate their tax burden, like pay no tax. So I think I want an NDP government, Jay, honestly, to have that urgent conversation because sometimes I feel like we're talking to the wrong people. And no disrespect, Minister Smith, I understand you care about public service too, but it's like, hey, I feel like sometimes I'm just talking to the mouthpiece and I'm not talking to the person moving the mouthpiece. And that to me is big business. It's the people who frankly call the shots at the legislature. All the lobbyists that I see swarming the building all the time. You take the stairs up on the east side of the building and you get out on the second floor. You take the elevator up, you do the same thing. There are literally rows of lobbyists waiting to meet with the premier. That's what pre-pandemic time was like. You want to look at Ontario's democratic deficit, you need only look at that part of the building. So I frankly think, we need to ramp up our outreach and our demands for fairness. And I don't think it's fair that Ontario is subsidizing the rich, the affluent, people like me. I don't think that's right. I don't think it's a good use of our money. Jay, what do you think about that? That was a long rant.
I think it's kind of interesting that you hit on one of the things that is confusing is social welfare for the wealthy is acceptable, but for the poor is not somehow. And it's kind of funny about your lobbyist role, because we talk about how businesses only seem to care if there's an angle. There was a lot of pushback this year for Bell Let's Talk and for a lot of these different things. There is a huge benefit to them, but we're also kind of starting to say, well, what about the other 364 days a year? So I think the people who have been advocating throughout I'll stick in my space and then disability. There's people who, when we're talking about needing more money for food, it's because the person's saying that's starving. Because the person who is advocating for more shelter allowance is someone who's facing homelessness or in an abusive situation or moldy and so on. And we focus a lot of time trying to get the current government to listen. And that's kind of how everyone wants it, is speak into the vacuum where it doesn't actually go anywhere. So I think a shift in focus into, I'll say, direct action with, if you look at the way we're kind of taught how to do it, we're taught to advocate the current government or try and get another party into power, like the NPP. But the change, I think, would be better, like you said, focused on the people benefiting don't realize that they would benefit more. Like, if everyone could take part in the economy, the economy is going to be better. It's not something that we still sell this idea to people that helping others costs us. Where if you want to help those people, you have to lose something. When it's not, it's like you said, it's tax write-offs, it's ultra wealthy people and businesses not paying tax. I don't remember the numbers because I wasn't really focused on it, but just simply Netflix and companies like this that don't pay tax. If we know of one, there's countless of them. So it wouldn't take from your plate to give to someone else's plate, but people just have this fear that, if we help, if there's more money for people on ODSP or on Ontario Works or a form of a guaranteed livable income, it's going to take from me and my family and my future, and it's absurd at this point to think. Like that.
Yeah, I would agree, but let me drill down even a bit further, Jay, if you don't mind, and say, like, some of the things that I have heard in my years about our income security programs. It suggests we've had a virus infecting this country for as long as it exists, and I hate to say it, I like my friends in England and those countries affiliated to England. We're one of them, but the English gave us this idea of the deserving and the undeserving poor. They gave us this idea of the Victorian poorhouse that said, let's make sure we distinguish between that person who is just poor for a while, who wants to work and wants to be a, self-reliant citizen. Let's distinguish between them and the people who are prone to idleness and living off the government. And we have to make sure that we have a big policing structure over our income security programs to ward against that. I mean, I look at the English tradition of public policy when it comes to income security and the Scandinavian approach, and they are on two totally different planets. I remember I was in Stockholm for work in 2008 during that financial crisis, and we spoke to a street outreach worker in Stockholm. I was working for the labor movement at the time in Canada. I was there, and they told us that their outreach workers in the city of Stockholm go around the city with keys, like a big ringlet of keys to apartments that people who are on the street can go to live in. And then if they want, with consent, avail themselves of wraparound services so they can help themselves. That's their approach to homelessness in Stockholm. A very, aggressive, person-centered, human approach to relating to somebody who's in trauma, who's having, for whatever reason, to live on the street. And what we inherited through England, I feel, is this approach where whether it's student loans, whether it's income security programs, and we just always build in this infrastructure. We spend billions probably on this infrastructure to make sure nobody is gaming the system. Like, this is our overriding concern. And I don't know about you, Jay, but everybody that I've run into on hashtag ODS poverty, or when we knocked on thousands of doors here in Ottawa Centre who was living on an ODSP or an Ontario Works income, all those folks contribute. They contribute massively. There isn't, when we had festivals, and I can't wait for them to return. I know my friend John Reddens, who's paying attention here, is part of this. No festival in Ottawa, no hockey game in Ottawa, no major public event in Ottawa, artistic event, happens without the volunteer labor of ODSP recipients or OW recipients. Mark Monahan, who runs City Folk and Blues Fest, has told me this straight up, that he is absolutely reliant on the generosity and the volunteering work of ODSP recipients. But when is that publicly recognized? Never. Mark does. I know Mark does, for the small events that he hosts for volunteers. But I'm talking, like, when is the province actually acknowledged that people who are living on our income security programs make enormous contributions? I think about the Causeway, which is an employment center for people with disabilities in Ottawa. And what they have told me straight up is employment options for folks with disabilities is an art. It's not a science. Every person is different, right? Every person has a different capacity to contribute. And they've bypassed government, frankly. They've gone directly to employers and said, what do you have? Because I've got someone who wants to work a day a week and build like a social network, through that, wants to get some value through that. But they want to be paid. It's not charity here. You want to work. What do you think? And they have an employers council of over 100 people, 100 different employers with extremely high placement rates. And as I told Minister Smith last week, that is respectful of people with disabilities and where they're coming from. But your government penalizes people. If they make too much, you get your benefits clawed back, right? I mean, I feel like the Premier, Jay, is saying on the one hand, best social program is a job, and this whole deserving poor, undeserving poor nonsense we inherited from the British, totally insensitive to the reality that everybody contributes, everybody wants to contribute. It's just, what are we doing through our public programs to enable that? Or are we just hating on people? What do you think?
One of the things that you hit on with the inherited view of things is contribution used to be viewed in the sense you're talking about gold to the kingdom, or jewels to the kingdom, or coal, or it was actual physical. This is for royalty, whoever is in control. Sorry.
No problem.
So contribution is normally, whoever's saying you need to contribute is actually saying you need to contribute to me. So when the Ford government is saying contribute, well, we're not donating to the Ford government. We're not donating to them, the Liberal government. Who we're contributing to determines if it's viewed as contribution. I spent quite a long time on Parisian Street at the Food Bank Distribution Center, and most of the people who volunteer there then go on their day to go pick up food.
That's right.
So it's and with there needs to be the full-on acceptance of the fact that there are people who are not going to ever be able to work we're never going to be able to find a way where they work in a sense of, I don't even know how to phrase this, but a physical, tangible product. Because someone who's advocating, they can be laying in bed hooked up to life support machines still advocating online. And they will always be met, well, if you can do this, you can work. So there is the understanding that there is many, many ways to contribute that are outside of the PR version that the Ford government or Liberal government used not to help.
Mhm.
And also, like you said, there are people who can contribute in countless ways that aren't viewed as benefiting others. So artists, you talked about art. There are artists who can sell, if they're on ODSP, they can sell art, but to be able to afford the supplies, maybe they can't. And to sell a painting, they may only be able to sell one painting, and then why spend all that time putting your heart and emotion into a piece of art just for it to be clawed back from you? So
Right.
it is a lot about control. Everything you talked about that we inherited is about control. It's controlling what is deemed as contributing, and who is in control gets to deem who that is.
Yeah.
I've always said that the government's in power. I personally say that the liberals and conservatives always fight for who's in control of the exploitation of people. And this is a perfect example of it, is they get to deem who is worthy and who has contributed. And unfortunately, they view a lot of people as not worthy of recognition or support.
Well, all I can tell you, Jay, is I want to have a conversation with every single person in Ontario and every single member of our party, every single member of every party, or non-aligned, or people who are just sitting it out because they can't stand the options on offer. Like all of you folks, I want them to imagine income security programs where we didn't spend an incredible amount of money policing people. And I've talked to ODSP workers. I've talked to Ontario Works workers who would like to actually be helping people they work with their life challenges, life stabilization problems, as Minister Smith was talking about last week, and not worrying, oh, are you in a new relationship, and does that mean there's a case for you to lose your benefits? Or hey, wait a sec, you made how much last week? Well, then you owe me this much. I mean, it's absurd.
You haven't contributed enough to have love is something that people need to understand. People on ODSP are told all the time, is you have not earned the right to love.
That is jarring, Jay. That is absolutely jarring. That's the level of our social control, is that we've told people they are not allowed to have love. That is, I hope that's one of the, I asked, for what it's worth, I asked Minister Smith if he was aware of this, and he said, maybe it was you, Jay, or someone else, that he had been confronted with this a number of times and that this was something on his radar. So, hey, as Jack Layton might have said, we got to work with everybody where they're at. At least he can't say he doesn't know the problem's there. But frankly, I want our ambition to be higher. Like, we just had a basic income pilot accidentally in this country where we said $2,000 a month was okay for 9 million people. Why isn't it okay for people on ODSP or on Ontario Works? And quick shout out to my friend Daniel Blakey, who's a member of Parliament from Manitoba. He's our national disability critic, and he is putting forward, as part of a vision from the federal NDP, a national disability benefit of $2,000 a month because of what we just went through. I would love to see this. I would love to see people demand that our party take this position. Because why would we have a different standard for people with disabilities? Why would we do that? Why would we say it's better for the country if y'all are living in poverty? If you can't find love, you can't find your man, can't find decent housing, that somehow is better for Ontario. I can definitely say to the ODSP workers who I've spoken to in the last number of weeks, the average caseload for those folks is 400 people. I mean, can you imagine? 400 people who are all living in different kinds of trauma, who all need help, we've created a really cynical situation, but it does not have to be this way. I know for a fact that my colleagues in BC, for example, when COVID hit, they put a permanent increase in disability benefits across the province of $300 a month, permanent, no exceptions and no clawbacks. When the CERB came in, small amount of people drawing upon ODSP who qualified for the CERB, none of that money was clawed back. So I don't want to hear anybody telling me the excuse, oh, it's just, it's just the status quo. It's not status quo on the West Coast. So why in the heck is it status quo here?
That's something that my petition was framed on that. The easiest way to look at all the pandemic support is everyone who was excluded from any pandemic support should definitely get a new support that goes up with inflation. It doesn't have all those strings attached because no one else had strings attached. It's like, well, you're too poor for support, and if you're going to get that support, we must be able to control every blink you make in every aspect of your life. And being on these social supports throughout the country are in many ways more damaging to mental health than supportive.
Yeah.
So that's definitely something that really we need to look at. But I do want to share the space with other people. This wasn't planned, and I so appreciate, because I know you always will give everyone the opportunity. So
it's all good, bud. It's all good. Well, look, it's great to have you with us. Maybe I'll see if someone else wants to join us for our last 10 minutes or so. But Jay, be well and take care, okay? And I have an email that I owe you. I know that, so I'm going to get on that today, okay?
And thank you very much. I want to say something. One of the very few things, there's a lot of things that are going against me continuously advocating and trying to do the things I'm doing. And seeing you outside of someone's landlord's house, standing on the street, boosting them, Acorn, Ottawa Acorn, and so many people. When you see politicians, normally the second they get elected, they forget the street, but you haven't left the street. And that's why I pose these questions when people watch this later who aren't here live, when I ask you the question of how do we keep the spotlight, I know you're not going to placate or come up with a cut and paste answer. You're going to actually try and find the answer. So thank you very much for remembering who you are and who the other people are.
Well, it's a pleasure, my friend. We're all troublemakers on this journey together. Take care, Jay. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So look, I'm going to read out a couple of more of these comments. Isabella writes, too low. The poverty line is over $2,000 per person in Canada now, when 12% of ODSP actually live in subsidized housing, according to ISAC, which is an income security research group. Income Security Advocacy Center, disabled Canadian citizens need average market rent money. The rent, not shelter allowance, should be $1,300 a month per single person, and their basic needs allowance should be $1,200 a month per single person. That equals $2,500 per month, not $2,000. Fair enough, Isabella. Fair enough. I mean, let's set our horizons up, and if that is a better target, then let's put forward a more ambitious target. I totally hear you. Totally hear you. So I want to say something else. Okay, I want to say something else. I want to invite all of us to not only think about this as an opportunity where we can express our feelings about what we can do. We've talked about people with disabilities today, and how we are failing them, failing their families, in many cases humiliating them, and we ask people to live in legislative poverty. I want us to think about the fact that it's not enough to hold this government accountable. I was suggesting earlier, and please tell me what you think about it, and let's do some strategizing about it. Maybe we need to think about who we're having this conversation with. It shouldn't only be the government of Ontario. Maybe we need to be asking affluent people. Maybe we need to be asking some of the more powerful companies that exist in our province and in our country. Ontario no longer has any reason to subsidize you. None. Why are we doing that? Why are we spending hundreds of millions of dollars subsidizing folks who are already affluent? It doesn't On the surface, for me, it doesn't make sense in a pandemic, and it doesn't make sense after a pandemic. So what do we do as other countries do to return some social solidarity? If you hear some rumbling around, by the way, that's our puppy upstairs who I think is playing with something. So this is an opportunity for us to scale up our ambition. I remember the great Bernie Sanders say once, and I loved it, that socialism is about fighting for somebody you've never met before. Socialism and an ambition of a big change in our society, to have justice, to have fairness, to have the kind of transformative change we need, it embodies a leap of faith, asking people to part ways with the normal way of doing things, the status quo way of doing things, which to me is piecemeal reform, ticky-tack Band-Aid solutions. We need big and bold ideas. So I'm hoping out of these Friday conversations that we can develop bold ideas based upon your input. So we are watching what comments are coming in, and I invite you to raise all of those ideas with me. As I mentioned, our federal disabilities critic, Member of Parliament Daniel Blakey, has proposed a federal benefit across the country of $2,000 a month. I hear what Isabella is saying, and I hear what others are saying. We can even improve upon that, but let's at least raise our expectations so we don't corner ourselves into thinking that we just have to be asking politicians to do little twists and turns based upon what we have. I think we can do a lot better. I think we can do a lot better than that. So what I'm going to ask us to consider for now is we are going into another week next week. The conversation I was thinking of having next Friday, because I know, frankly, I was in the community this morning, and a number of parents were having a rally at City Hall because they're really concerned about their children. They're really concerned with what huge focus on online education has done for the mental health of children and teenagers. We are seeing a huge spike in admissions for mental health disorders, eating disorders, for example, self-harm amongst kids and teens, because we have asked them to be separated from their friends, from their schools, from really important circuits of their life. And I think we have to get our heads around what a mental wellness strategy looks like for families, for people, for kids, and for children. So I'm going to see if I can recruit somebody next Friday to have a conversation with us about that, because mental health is physical health. We're coming to a better awareness of this, and we can actually do something about this. Isabel is pointing out in the comments that there's going to be a protest on July 17th for speaking out against poverty. Awesome. If I can, Isabella, I will be there. I will be there. I have a family and some obligations here in Ottawa too, so if I can, I will be there. Thank you for organizing that. So, but next Friday, let's, I'm just seeding the ground here now, because we've had a good conversation. We've had some good reflections on disability rights, what we need to do for disability justice, building an enabling society. I want to seed the ground of thinking, what do we do to build more resilient communities that care about mental health? Because I fear, from what I heard this morning from a number of families, many kids are falling behind. Many people pre-pandemic were falling behind. I think a big piece is related to what we've been talking about right now: income security, opportunities, a caring society for people with disabilities. That'll help a great deal if we can do that. But there's more to the story. Why do so many children hate themselves? Why do so many children feel so alone? Why do so many youth get drawn into hateful, to borrow from something we were talking about at the beginning of our time today? Why do so many youth, this 20-year-old in London, how do people get consumed by these hateful thoughts of our Muslim neighbors, of our queer or trans neighbors? How does this happen? I would love to have a conversation with all of you next week, everybody tuning in, about that. Because if we can start having some honest looks in the mirror about what we can do to improve upon that, I think it would really help us. So I've got a 1:00 with our, there you go. Isabella's put a link in the chat there, I think on Facebook, about the protest. Copy that. I've got to run because we've got a staff conversation here at 1:00 with the team. Honestly, I can't even tell you all that I am blessed to work with, including Samia, who's helping to curate this conversation right now, Peyton and Kieran. We have check-ins twice a week. And that starts at 1. And the only reason anything happens in our office in Ottawa Centre is because of that fantastic group of people for whom I am very thankful. So I've got to run for now, folks, but thank you for joining us for Java with Joel. I hope you've enjoyed the opportunity and the experience. And I hope we continue this. I hope this becomes a ritual for us, that we can get together virtually here, because we can't open up the doors of our constituency office now, but we can certainly open up spaces on the internet where we can open up our hearts to each other. Okay? So everyone, be well. Take care. I'm thankful for all the comments that I've made. We'll be going over those. And if there's one thought I have to share for you this weekend, if you can find a moment, if you're doing it already, thank you. Find a moment to show some kindness to someone who's in a tough space. Do it, because that's what we need right now. We need a lot more kindness in this moment. A lot of us are tired and a lot of us are suffering. So every time we take a moment to reach out and do something, it adds up. We need it. Take care. Bye for now.